Hi, and welcome back to my channel. At this point, you probably do know me. My name's Mario. If you do not, I am a clinical research associate, worked in clinical research for 15 years, been a CRA for over 12 of them. I also have a huge interest in personal finance and love to travel. So, on occasion, I do hope to put out videos on those latter topics. But in today's video, I'm just going to hop onto Reddit and answer questions on clinical research that are being asked on Reddit. So without further ado, I have my phone here. I am on Reddit and I am going to get started answering these questions. So question one, how did you become a CRA? All right, perfect start. Um, Hi all, just wanted a glimpse at some CRA's journeys to where they're at. Education, jobs leading up, how long it took with all the jobs in clinical research. I want to see what routes are taken to where I want to be. Thanks. Um, I think this would have been a slightly better question if you mentioned where you want to be and then asked for the route to get there. But let's cover the basics. So, education. In terms of education, I have a degree from Brown University. I triple majored, so I have majors in biology, sociology, and what today at Brown is called commerce, organization, and entrepreneurship. It is essentially a business degree. When I was there, it was called public and private sector organization, but it's the same field, and it's basically entrepreneurship and business. So that's my education. Jobs leading up. So the jobs leading up, I did volunteer at hospitals while I was in college. I also did a teaching internship at Super Kids Camp in Baltimore. So Super Kids Camp, for those not familiar, is basically a camp set up to help inner city kids who are not yet at the level they should be in English and math. So I was an English and math teacher to inner city kids in Baltimore. I also did an internship at Merrill Lynch in private wealth management. So those were some of the things I did before, but right off the gun, starting out, my first job was in clinical research. I was a clinical research coordinator at Dana-Farber. So that's where I got started, and basically worked my way to being a CRA, senior CRA, etc. Moving on from Dana Farber. I think straight after Dana Farber was lead CRA at Stanford, and then an entry level CRA position, and then a CRA position, and senior CRA, etc. So that's my career trajectory. My end goal was to end up as a CRA line manager. I sort of never actually quite got to that goal. Ended up really enjoying being a CRA, and didn't actually run into too many opportunities to become a line manager. I've had a lot of opportunities to become a clinical trial manager, and that job in the past just hasn't been that appealing to me. There's a lot of stress, and you have to interact directly with sponsors or management, and there's a lot of timelines and a lot of pressure on you in the clinical trial manager role. It's something I would consider. It's just something that I wasn't as eager to do as I was line management, which is where my strength is. I like to teach. I like to help people grow their careers. I like to help doing more of that stuff than necessarily grinding to all the timelines and trying to make sure we're sticking to everything. There are timelines as a CRA, don't get me wrong. It's just that the clinical trial manager is much more of the face of the trial and the go-to person for everything not going according to plan. So there's that added element of stress. The good side of a clinical trial manager position and why people usually take it is they don't travel that much. So if you're looking for something that's like being a CRA but doesn't involve travel, clinical trial manager is a good role, and a lot of people transition into that role from being a CRA. So that answers, I think, all the questions in how did I become a CRA, and so I think that's a good answer to that question. So let me hop onto another thread here. For those of you who've left the CRA role, what are you doing now, and are you happier? Not exactly the best question for me, since I mostly did the CRA role throughout my career. However, I've known plenty of people to leave. There are a couple of reasons people leave. The most common, probably if you're staying in clinical research, is to take a clinical trial manager role. That position has no travel, or I should say less travel. There might be once in a blue moon travel for clinical trial managers, but it has a lot more stress. So if you're burned out from travel and you want to stick, I think I've mentioned this. So clinical trial manager is the perfect role. The other people I know have left have just left clinical research. It wasn't for them. They're a lot happier, but they're happier because they didn't want to work in clinical research, and now they don't. So that's the answer to that. The next question: how to get an oncology study if I don't have previous experience? I would really like to work in that therapeutic area. So I think I'm the perfect person to answer this question, having worked in oncology 15 years and CRA for 12 of them, almost all in oncology. I think there are two ways to go about this, and ideally you should do both. The first is to pick up as many pre-study or site selection visits in oncology that you can. Assuming you're at a big CRO, you'll have plenty of opportunity to pick up these extra visits, often called SWAT visits, and you just step in. However, one caveat: make sure you know the protocol and you know the disease area before you start randomly doing pre-study visits. The last thing you want to do is go to a site, have the principal investigator start asking you questions, and then have them go back and say, the CRA you sent doesn't know anything about the disease. So, for example, if you were going to do a pre-study visit on study for prostate cancer, make sure you know about things like PSAs for prostate cancer and a little bit of how it's diagnosed, how it's treated, and just have some basic knowledge at minimum. So just don't pick up pre-study visits and then look like you don't know what you're talking about when you meet with the principal investigator. So that's avenue one. And then avenue two is to co-monitor with an experienced oncology CRA. I've trained a lot of people in oncology over the years. So a lot of oncology studies have a lot of work. So there'll be opportunity to co-monitor with an experienced oncology CRA. And if you have that opportunity, you should do it. So that's how I would do the 1-2 approach of moving on to oncology. There is one more warning. Once you move into oncology, it's hard to move out. So just keep that in mind. So if you start realizing maybe I don't really want to do oncology, I would say try to get into some other areas sooner rather than later. Once you have a lot of oncology experience, you're almost certainly just going to be assigned to oncology studies. I know this firsthand because at one point I tried to move to gain broader experience, and then I just kept being reassigned to oncology. They're like, well, you're one of the most experienced oncology people. Why don't you want to do oncology? And so in the end, I just did oncology. So just bear with, or keep that in mind rather, that if you do get into oncology, it's going to be a little bit harder to transition out. So that answers that. So let's go on to the next question here. New grad looking for advice. Background: I'm graduating in December with a bachelor's in biology and economics from UVA, and I want to get into clinical research drug development field. This past summer, I had a wonderful internship at a big CRO. In the future, I want to become a CRA, and further down the line, probably go into project management. All right, so there are several questions in here, so let's take them one at a time. Where should I start, a sponsor or a CRO? It doesn't matter. If you really want to become a CRA and like that's your goal, CROs have real defined training programs. This is really true of big CROs. If you go to like the IQVIA, Syneos, Icons of the world, you'll go through their training program. The pharma companies may not necessarily have that defined of a training program. I don't think it really matters, sponsor or CRO. Whatever you can get, take. It sounds like you already did an internship at a big CRO. I'd be tempted to go to that big CRO. What companies are the best? What companies are hiring? Well, to the latter, in 2021, virtually everyone is hiring. I can't think of a CRO that isn't hiring. I get called numerous times a day from many CROs to about potential positions, and entry level is going to be a little harder than that, but I don't think it'll be that hard. Just apply. What companies are best? I'm going to say this. So all CROs are kind of similar. There may be things you slightly prefer at one CRO versus another. For example, one of the CROs I worked with does a per diem instead of a meal reimbursement with receipts. So it's a lot easier to do the expense report. So you don't spend as much time because you just put in the zip code of where you were and they give you a per diem amount rather than having to like photograph every receipt. But things like that are not going to matter to someone entry level. You're basically going to only know the systems of the place you start, and you're not going to sit down and start thinking about, hey, at this other company they do things better this way. Once you get a lot of experience and you've worked at many companies, you sort of start thinking things like that. You're like, well, I wish the company I worked with did a per diem because I remember what doing a per diem was like, and just putting in the zip code instead of having to photograph all these receipts is a lot more efficient. So things like that. But again, all CROs, all big CROs are essentially the same. You go to the one that hires you. You did an internship at one, so maybe you have an inside scoop into that and being hired there. So that's my 2 cents on that. What entry-level positions should I be looking for? At a CRO sponsor, you're basically going to get whatever the equivalent of a clinical trials associate position is. Clinical trials associate, clinical affairs associate, might be called something of that nature. But that is your most realistic role, entry level at a CRO or sponsor. Yeah, I think that's what I would lean toward. Typical salary and compensation package for entry level. I'm not the right person for this question because I am not super familiar with entry level salaries other than for the CRA role. So I'm going to skip that. What's the timeline for advancement promotion? So the timeline for advancement promotion in anything clinical research is 2 years. It basically takes 1 year to learn the job and then another year to perfect your skills. So I would say within 2 years you can probably move on from whatever you start out doing. That's the rough like average timeline. It may be longer or shorter, but I would say prepare for 2 years. So those are my answers to those questions. So let's see here. This is going to be on the same note. Recent grad looking to get into the industry. Hi everyone. I recently graduated with my Bachelor's of Science majoring in Public Health, Health Sciences. I've been applying to some clinical research assistant jobs around me, but haven't had much luck. I guess I'm just wondering if anyone has any tips for someone who's trying to gain experience in clinical research. Entry-level jobs should be looking for other than assistant roles. I've seen some companies that have programs to learn more about the industry, such as clinical research fast track, but I wasn't sure if it's something I really need to in order to be considered for a job. Any advice helps. So I'm not super familiar with clinical research fast track, so I'll skip that part. You probably don't need it. So that's my thought on there. I think your biggest limitation here is, from what I can read in this question, is it says you're applying to jobs around me. So assuming you have the opportunity and you can easily get up and move, and hopefully as a new grad, there's nothing really tying you down to your area, kids that are in schools that you can't move, etc. Apply to jobs everywhere. Every big academic research center is going to have a clinical research coordinator type role. Every clinic is, etc. So apply everywhere. I would basically look through the 50 states and apply to 25 of them a day, positions a day in different states, and see what you get. There's no reason in 2021 that someone should be struggling to find a job. The only reason I can think of is the geographic limitation. If you put arbitrary limitations on where you apply, you're going to struggle. But if you're just open to applying everywhere, I would start and really, really just keep putting in those applications. And when I say apply to a lot of places, take a few minutes and make sure your application is actually good. I mean, read the job description, make sure your resume lines up, make sure you're putting in information. Don't just send the same resume of 25 places blindly and hope for the best. Take a little bit of time and apply. So I think just my thoughts from reading your question is that geographic limitation is really the problem. So let's see here. Probably do a couple more questions here. Can I be a CRC if I have chronic wrist pain? Hello, I'm a college graduate with a background in neuroscience. I excelled academically using dictation software, but I have chronic tendonitis in my wrist, which prevents me from doing repetitive activities that require fine motor skills. Typing a lot, chopping carrots for greater than 10 minutes. I can use my arms just fine. I'm interested in entering clinical research as a CRC. Is this a realistic goal, or would my wrist issues likely make me too inefficient and miserable, both as a CRC and in future roles I may rise to? Thank you very much. I think the only way to answer this question is to go out and try being a CRC. I can't really think of too many things that would limit you. Similar to what you did in college, most companies have an ADA compliance department to make sure that disabilities are basically people can work with disabilities, and everything that I can think of you do as a CRC could probably be done with dictation software, data entry, etc. The only thing I can think of that may be a little bit of a pain is if you're saying medication names. Dictation software probably won't necessarily pick up on uh, brand name pharma drugs, or even some of the generics, which might be complex. But I think an ADA department would like work with you to make sure the disability is addressed, and that you can work. So I think the best thing to do here is to try it. And to be honest, most people trying are actually just trying the clinical research coordinator role. I think very few people have gone in saying it's my dream to be a clinical research coordinator, and I know a ton about the job. If you're looking for an entry level, just try it. If in a year you decide, hey, this is not for me, you can just leave. The other thing that I'll address is jobs that you may get promoted to. If you go on to be a CRAs write a lot of trip reports. I probably averaged at least one or two a week for most of my career. Trip reports can be really long depending on the type of visit. So just keep that in mind. But again, I think dictation software will get you around the most of the typing. I do type a lot personally, but I don't have any limitations stopping me from doing that, so I haven't looked into the alternatives. But I'm sure companies would work with you on that. So I wouldn't use that as to deter you. All right, so let's take another one of these questions. An international medical graduate wishes to secure a CRC entry-level position in States. Chances. Hi, I'm a medical graduate, 2017, with 2 published papers and 2 years of clinical experience in my own country, Pakistan. I have applied to many CRC positions, but unfortunately never got an interview call. Is it because because of my visa requiring status, or because of my entry-level status? But I apply only to entry-level jobs only. Although I don't have any GCP certifications, etc., but I have good experience in consent taking and convincing patients to take part in a clinical trial. Any tips on my situation? So let me go in order. So the answer is probably it's a combination of both. More so your visa status. If you are applying to jobs needing an H-1B visa, you're probably not going to be called by the majority of places. The only places that I can think that may do visas for coordinators or might be large academic centers. As an international medical grad, I would almost certainly recommend rethinking your approach. You're probably not going to get these kind of jobs to do visa sponsorship. Your better approach here, if it's an option, is to take the USMLE and apply to residency, and most residency programs will do visas without any issue. The next best thing is big academic centers and coordinator roles there, where they do visas anyway, so you can sort of get slid in with the residents. So Those are the only ways I can think of. Most pharma CROs, they're not going to touch anybody that needs visa sponsorship, unfortunately. So uh, or because of my entry level status. I don't think it's necessarily your entry level status. International medical grad gives you some credibility of at least knowing medical terminology. I don't think the 2 years of clinical experience carries much weight, given that I was in Pakistan. So it's probably not going to be that beneficial. But the international medical graduate, yes, you probably know medical terminology. So that would be good. The other thing I want to say is the last part of your question, and this makes me think it's a little bit of language or a little bit of not super familiar with regulations. But the last thing you ever want to say is that you're convincing patients to take part in a clinical trial. That's called coercion. That is, strictly against all ethical rules. So be careful with your wording here, because if you went into an interview and said you are convincing patients to take part in a clinical trial, that interview would be over then and there. You're alluding to something that's considered unethical. What you should be saying instead is, I'm very good at presenting uh, the clinical trial and explaining it to subjects to see if they're interested in participating. And often, because of my detailed way of explaining the consent form, etc., subjects have a good grasp and are able to make their own independent decision based on the knowledge of what the study entails that I was be able to provide to them. So you need to be super careful with your wording here. This kind of wording will, even if you get an interview and you say this at an interview, the interview is over then and there. And it's not even. It's one of those like huge red flags type of situations. So this is where I said clinical experience in another country may not necessarily translate that well to the United States, but um, it's just an example of that. So I'll take on probably 2 or 3 more questions at most here. So let me scroll down here on through Reddit and consider. All right, this is going to be a couple of lighthearted questions here to end. I'm going to end on these two. So first question: bringing family on your site visit. Has anyone brought a family member while they were on site? Do you have to inform your manager? Can I sneak them along while not adding extra cost to the company? For example, bringing your sister to NYC. All right, I don't know why people feel the need to sneak and convince people. All right, I have brought family members on visits. I have told my line manager, I've told everybody, there is no need to sneak anybody anywhere. For example, I went to a site visit with my sister in Syracuse. We stayed at the Hampton Inn I was staying at. We had 2 beds. I almost always have 2 beds there. They assigned me to the 2-bedroom. And there was no extra cost for her. This was a company that did a per diem anyway, so there was no receipts or anything. My manager was fully aware. I told her, hey, my sister's going to come and join me on this visit. My sister hung out at the hotel, swam in the pool during the day while I was gone, and then we went had dinner. But there was no sneaking. You don't need to sneak. You're not doing anything wrong. Like I feel like the question here: tell your line manager, hey, my family member is accompanying me. If there's no extra cost, there's no extra cost to the company. I don't think anybody really cares. Now, what you shouldn't be doing is adding extra cost. So don't submit a meal receipt that says you had 2 drinks and 2 hamburgers, and it's clear you're splitting for 2 people. So don't do that. But other than that, like you just make sure there are no extra costs to the company. Tell your line manager, tell everyone, tell the world, hey, family members accompanying me on this visit. You can even make a YouTube video. I don't think anybody will care. All right, so I want to end on this question because it's lighthearted, and I think you will enjoy the question. So the title is Bed Bugs in Hotels. All right, here's the question. I was wondering, what is the best way to avoid bed bugs in hotels when traveling as a CRA? Can you request a bed bug inspection? How many times have you found bed bugs in your hotel rooms? If bed bugs are a common occurrence, I'd rather pick another job, so please help me out. All right, I have good news and I have bad news. So let me start with some of the good news. I've traveled for 12 plus years as a CRA, and I have never once had any issues with bed bugs. And I am not the most uh, diligent. I know there are CRAs out there that go into the hotel, they lift their sheets, they inspect them very closely, they look for any signs of bed bugs, etc. I do not. I just look to see if the sheets are clean or not, and as long as they're clean, I'm good. I actually even know of CRAs that bring their own set of sheets and switch them out so they're not sleeping on the hotel sheets. I was never going to do that. I'm not that kind of person. So, it's just too much effort for me. I got deal with the consequences of my actions rather than having to carry my own sheets or having to spend a significant time checking in and searching for the room for potential bed bugs. I have my number one tip is to stay at decent hotels. I usually try to stay at the Hampton Inn as a minimum or above, so something in the class of a Hampton Inn. Hampton Inns vary from location to location. They're 2 or 3 stars depending on where they are. On occasion, you'll hit a 4-star Hampton Inn, but generally a 3-star hotel will suffice, and you won't run too much into bed bugs. That should not deter you from becoming a CRA. 12 plus years, I haven't encountered them once. If I do, I'll deal with it, but it hasn't been such a huge impact to my career that I tell people don't start as a CRA because of bed bugs. The other thing I will mention that's sort of bad news, I actually do know CRAs that have had to deal with bed bugs. I went to a training session at a CRO. This was the first CRO I worked for. We had our initial training at an Embassy Suites in Tampa, Florida, and we all stayed there. But one of the people who showed up in the training session showed up covered in bed bug bites. So it's not a complete non-concern. I just don't think it's that big of a concern. So it can happen, but if it happens once in 10 years, I don't think that should stop you from becoming a CRA. The other thing that I will mention, it's not only bed bugs necessarily. I know bed bugs are concerns. I have stayed at hotels where you'd have cockroaches or lizards or things of that nature. I stayed at a hotel in Hutchinson Island, Florida, and there were lizards there was a lizard in my room. I extracted that lizard, but I can see some people not wanting to do that. So just know, I don't think bed bugs are a deterrent to becoming a CRA. As to bed bug inspections, good luck. I can't think of any hotels that will specifically say we carry out bed bug inspections on request specifically for you. Housekeeping probably should be doing that and looking, but in general, I don't think you're going to have any luck with bed bug inspections. And even if they found them, they're not going to necessarily tell you, hey, the room that you're about to have has evidence of bed bugs. Are you going to still consider staying there? It's just something that happens in hotels once in a blue moon, and you have to deal with it. My biggest tip here is to stay at as good and reputable a hotel brand, so you're not staying at motels or places that have high turnover or not necessarily the cleanest. So those are my tips. So I think that was a good way to end with bed bugs in hotels and its impact on potential future CRAs. So as always, if you've enjoyed this video and you've made it this far, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out. Currently at 263 subscribers, trying to get to that 1,000 number by the end of the year. So I have a long way to go. Hitting that like button helps me out tremendously. And of course, if you have other questions, please list them down in the comments. I try to respond to all the comments. So I will do my best to answer them. And if there's something you really want me to make a video about, please also list that down. I know someone has requested putting out videos on how an FDA auditor would come and look at a site. So that's something I'm considering. Also considering putting out a video on the site initiation visit. I know my pre-study visit video was a hit. So those are just some of my thoughts. But if there's something you really want to watch a video on, let me know. So thank you for watching, and I really appreciate it. Until next time, take care.